Hi everybody, welcome to Dopey's Broke. I am Amber and I hope you guys are having a wonderful day today. I'm going to be reading The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. But before I do that, I just want to say I have a thick book of Hans Christian Andersen stuff. And so I read it out of that book. And I was looking at other books that I should read, and I didn't even realize that I had this one. It's illustrated by Charles Centaur. It says it's the classic edition. I haven't seen the photos, but this looks really pretty. It looks very delicate. So I figured why not? Oh boy. Says, this book is dedicated to my dear daughter, Christina, CS. Far out in the ocean, where the water is as blue as the prettiest cornflower and as clear as crystal, it is very, very deep. It is so deep indeed that no cable could measure it, and many church steeples, piled upon one another, would not reach from the ground beneath to the surface of the water above. There dwell the Sea King and his subjects. At the bottom of the sea grow the strangest flowers and plants, and fish glide between the branches as birds fly among the trees here upon land. In the deepest spot of all stands the castle of the Sea King. Its walls are built of coral, and its long Gothic windows are of the clearest amber. The roof is formed of shells that open and close as the water flows over them, and in each lies a glittering pearl that would be fit for the crown of a queen. The Sea King had been a widower for many years, and his aged mother kept house for him. She was a very sensible woman, but exceedingly proud of her high birth, and wore 12 oysters on her tail, while others of high rank were only allowed to wear 6. She was, however, deserving of a very great praise, especially for her care of the little sea princesses, her 6 granddaughters. They were beautiful children, but the youngest was the prettiest of them all. Her skin was as clear and delicate as a rose leaf, and her eyes as blue as the deepest sea. But, like others, she had no feet, and her body ended in a fish's tail. All day long the princesses played in the great halls of the castle, or among the living flowers that grew out of the walls. The large amber windows were open, and the fish swam in right up to the princesses, ate out of their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. I forget it was a picture book. Am I going to have to block some of this stuff out? Outside the castle, there was a beautiful garden in which grew bright red and dark blue flowers. The fruit glittered like gold, and the leaves and stems waved to and fro. The earth itself was the finest sand, as blue as the flame of burning sulfur. Over everything lay a peculiar blue radiance, as if the blue sky were everywhere, above and below, instead of the dark depths of the sea. Each of the young princesses had a little plot of ground in the garden, where she might dig and plant as she pleased. One arranged her flower bed in the form of a well. Another preferred to make hers like the figure of a little mermaid. while the youngest child made hers round, like the sun, and she grew flowers as red as the sunset. She was a strange child, quiet and thoughtful, while her sisters showed delight at the wonderful things they obtained from the wrecks of vessels. She cared only for her pretty red flowers and a beautiful marble statue in the shape of a handsome boy, which had fallen to the bottom of the sea from a wreck. So I don't know if I have to black out these photos. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful photos. Super pretty. Nothing gave her so much pleasure as to hear about the world above the sea. She made her old grandmother describe all she knew of the ships and of the towns, the people, and the animals. To her, it seemed most wonderful to hear that the flowers of the land had fragrance, while those below the sea had none, and that the fishes among the trees could sing so sweetly. Her grandmother called the birds fishes, or the little mermaid would not have understood what was meant, for she had never seen birds. When you have reached your 15th year, said the grandmother, you will have permission to rise out of the sea and sit on the rocks in the moonlight while the great ships go sailing by. Then you will see both forest and towns. In the following year, one of the sisters would be 15. But as each was a year younger than the next, the youngest would have to wait 5 years before her turn came to rise up from the bottom of the ocean to see the earth. However, each promised to tell the others what she saw on her first visit, and what she thought was most beautiful. I'm struggling a little bit. I've got contacts in today. My eyes are not used to them, and I'm used to hiding behind my glasses, and so things are just kind of, I'm trying to find my sweet spot when it comes to these contacts. So. None of them longed so much for her turn to come as the youngest, she who had the longest time to wait, and who was so quiet and thoughtful. Many nights she stood by the open window, looking up through the dark blue water, watching the fish as they splashed about with their fins and tails. She could see the moon and stars shining faintly, but through the water they looked larger than they do to our eyes. When something like a black cloud passed between her and them, she knew it was either a whale swimming over her head or a ship full of human beings who never imagined that a pretty little mermaid was standing beneath them, holding out her white hands towards the keel of their ship. At length, the eldest was 15 and was allowed to rise to the surface of the ocean. When she returned, she had hundreds of things to talk about. But the finest thing she said was to lie on a sandbank in the quiet moonlit sea, gazing at the lights of the nearby town that twinkled like hundreds of stars, and listening to the sounds of music, the noise of carriages, the voices of human beings, and the merry paling of the bells in the church steeples. Because she could not go near all these wonderful things, she longed for them a little more. She longed for all of them the more. I think the imagery is just super stunning. Well, how eagerly did the youngest sister listen to all these descriptions. And afterwards, when she stood at the open window looking up through the dark blue water, she thought of the great city with all of its bustle and noise, and even fancied she could hear the sound of the church bells down in the depths of the sea. In another year, the second sister received permission to rise to the surface of the water and to swim about where she pleased. And she rose just as the sun was setting. And this, she said, was the most beautiful sight of all. The whole sky looked like gold and velvet, and rose-colored clouds drifted across it. More swiftly than the cloud flew a large flock of wild swans toward the setting sun, like long white veils across the sea. She also swam towards the sun, but it sank into the waves, and the tiny rose tints faded from the clouds, from the sea, and from the sea. This book has a lot of words, a lot more than I remember. Let me get some more water because I'm struggling. She also swam towards the sun, but it sank into the waves, and the rose tints faded from the clouds and from the sea. The third sister's turn followed, and she was the boldest of them all, for she swam up a broad river that emptied into the sea. In a narrow creek, she found a large group of little human children playing in the water. She wanted to play with them, but they fled in a great fright. And then a little black animal, it was a dog, but she did not know it, for she had never seen one before, came to the water and barked at her so furiously that she became frightened and rushed back to the open sea. But she said she should never forget the beautiful forest, the green hills, and the pretty children who could swim in the water, although they had no tails. The fourth sister was more timid. She remained in the midst of the sea, but said it was quite as beautiful there as nearer the land. She could see many miles around her, and the sky above looked like a bell of glass. She had seen the ships, but at such a distance. But at such a great distance that they looked like a seagull. The dolphins sported in the waves, and the great whales spouted water from their nostrils till it seemed as if 100 fountains were playing in every direction. The fifth sister's birthday occurred in the winter, so when her turn came, she saw what others had not seen for the first time they went up. The sea looked quite green, and large icebergs were floating about. They were of the most unusual shapes and glittered like diamonds. She had seated herself on one of the largest and let the wind play with her long hair. She noticed that all the ships sailed past very rapidly, steering as far away as they could, as if they were afraid of the iceberg. Towards evening, dark clouds covered the sky, the thunder rolled, and the flashes of lightning glowed red on the iceberg. On the ships, the sails were reefed with fear and trembling, while she sat on the floating iceberg, calmly watching the lightning as it darted its forked flashes into the sea. Each of the sisters, when she first had permission to rise to the surface, was delighted with the new and beautiful sights. But now that they were grown-up girls and could go when they pleased, they had become quite indifferent about it. Yet often in the hours In the evening hours, the 5 sisters would twine their arms about each other. I'm struggling. Yet often in the evening hours, the 5 sisters would twine their arms about each other and rise to the surface together. Their voices were more charming than that of any human being. And before the approach of a storm, when they feared that the ship might be lost, they swam before the vessel, singing and chanting songs of delight to be found in the depths of the sea, and begging the voyagers not to fear if they sank to the bottom. But the sailors could not understand the song and thought it was the sighing of the storm. When the sisters rose arm in arm through the water, their youngest sister would stand quite alone, looking after them, ready to cry. Only, since mermaids have no tears, she suffered more acutely. "Oh, were I but 15 years old," she said. "I know that I shall love the world up there and all the people who live in it." At last, the younger sister reached her 15th year. "Well, now you are grown up," said the old dowager? I forgot that word. Another name for her grandmother. "Come and let me adorn you like your sisters." And she placed in her hair a wreath of white lilies, of which every leaf was half a pearl. Then the old lady ordered 8 great oysters to attach themselves to the tail of the princess to show her high rank. "But they hurt me so," said the little mermaid. "Pride must suffer pain," replied the old lady. So this is the youngest mermaid. I think these photos are just so beautiful. Oh, how gladly she would have shaken off all this grandeur and laid aside the heavy wreath. The red flowers in her own garden would have suited her much better. But she cannot change, so she said farewell and rose as lightly as a bubble to the surface of the water. The sun had just set when she raised her head above the waves. The clouds were tinted with crimson and gold, and through the glimmering twilight beamed the evening star in all its beauty. The sea was calm, and the air mild and fresh. A large ship with 3 masts lay becalmed on the water. Only 1 sail was set, for not a breeze stirred, and the sailors sat idle on deck or amidst the rigging. There was music and singing on board, and as darkness fell, 100 colored lanterns were lighted. The little mermaid swam close to the cabin windows. Now and then, as the waves lifted her up, she could look in through the glass window panes and see a number of gaily dressed people. Among them, and the most beautiful of all, was a young prince with large black eyes. He was 16 years of age, and his birthday was being celebrated with great display. The sailors were dancing on deck, and when the prince came out of the cabin, more than 100 rockets rose in the air, making it as bright as day. These photos are just paintings. I'm just saying, these are beautiful. I can just stare at it. Oh boy. The little mermaid was so startled that she dived underwater, and when she resurfaced, it looked as if all the stars of heaven were falling around her. Heaven were falling around her. She had never seen such fireworks before. Great suns spurted fire about. Splendid fireflies flew into the blue air, and everything was reflected in the clear, calm sea beneath. The ship itself was so brightly illuminated that all the people and even the smallest boat could be distinctly seen. How handsome the young prince looked as he pressed the hands of all his guests and smiled at them while the music resounded through the clear night air. It was very late, yet the little mermaid could not take her eyes from the ship or from the beautiful prince. The colored lanterns had been extinguished, no more rockets rose in the air, and the cannon had ceased firing. The sea became restless, and a moaning, grumbling sound could be heard beneath the waves. Still, the little mermaid remained by the cabin window, rocking up and down on the water so that she could look within. After a while, the sails were quickly set, and the ship went on her way. But soon the waves rose higher. Heavy clouds darkened the sky, and lightning appeared in the distance. A dreadful storm was approaching. Once more the sails were furled, and the great ship pursued her flying course over the raging sea. The waves rose mountain high, but the ship divided like a swan before them, then rose again on their lofty foaming crest. At length, the ship groaned and creaked. The thick planks gave way under the lashing of the sea as the waves broke over the deck. The mainmast snapped asunder like a reed, and as the ship lay over on her side, the water rushed in. The little mermaid now perceived that the crew were in danger. Even she was obliged to be careful, to avoid the beams and planks of the wreck that lay scattered on the water. For one moment it was so dark that she could not see a single object, but then a flash of lightning came. It revealed the whole scene. She could see everyone who had been on board except the prince, who had sunk into the deep waves. At first she was glad, for she thought he would now be with her. But then she remembered that human beings could not live in the water, so that when he got down to her father's palace, he would certainly be quite dead. No, he must not die. Diving under the dark waters, rising and falling with the waves, she at length managed to reach the young prince, who was fast losing the power to swim in that stormy sea. His limbs were failing him. His beautiful eyes were closed. And he would have died had not the little mermaid come to his assistance. She held his head above the water and let the waves carry them where they would. In the morning, the storm had ceased, but of the ship, not a single fragment could be seen. The sun came up red and shining out of the water, and in its beams brought back the hue of health to the prince's cheeks, but his eyes remained closed. The mermaid kissed his high, smooth forehead and stroked back his wet hair. He seemed to her like the marble statue in her little garden, so she kissed him again and wished that he might live. Presently they came in sight of land, and she saw lofty blue mountains capped with white snow. Beautiful green forests were near the shore, and close by stood a large building. The sea here formed a little bay, in which the water lay quiet and still, but very deep. She swam with the handsome prince to the beach, which was covered with fine white sand, and there she laid him in the warm sunshine. Bells sounded in the large white building, and some young girls came into the garden. The little mermaid swam out farther from the shore and hid herself among some high rocks that rose out of the water. Covering her head and neck with the foam of the sea, she watched there to see what would become of the poor prince. It was not long before she saw a young girl approach the spot where the prince lay. She seemed frightened at first, but only for a moment. Then she brought a number of people, and the mermaid saw that the prince came to life again and smiled upon those who stood about him. I really do like these pictures. These are really awesome. But to her, he sent no smile, for he was unaware that she had saved him. This made her very sorrowful, and when he was led away into the great building, she dived down into the water and returned to her father's castle. She had always been silent and thoughtful, and now she was more so than ever. Her sisters asked her what she had seen during her first visit to the surface of the water, but she told them nothing. Many an evening and morning did she rise to the place where she had left the prince. She saw the fruits in the garden ripen and watched them gathered. She watched the snow on the mountaintops melt away, but never did she see the prince, and therefore she always returned home more sorrowful than before. Her only comfort was to sit in her own little garden and fling her arm around the beautiful marble statue that was like the prince. She gave up tending her flowers, and they grew in wild confusion over the paths, so that the whole place became dark and gloomy. At length she could bear it no longer and told one of her sisters all about it. Why has he got some Aquaman looking stuff going on down here? And still beautiful, beautiful work. And very soon it became known to several mermaids, one of whom had a friend who happened to know about the prince. This mermaid had also seen the festival on board the ship, and she told them where the prince came from and where his palace stood. "Come, little sister," said the other princesses. Then they entwined their arms and rose together to the surface of the water, near the spot where the prince's palace stood. It was built of bright yellow, shining stone, and had long flights of marble steps, one of reached quite down to the sea. Through the clear crystal of the lofty windows could be seen noble rooms with costly silk curtains and hangings of tapestry, and walls covered with beautiful paintings. Now that the little mermaid knew where the prince lived, she spent many an evening and many a night in the water near the palace. She swam much nearer the shore than any of the others had ventured, and once she went up the narrow channel under the marble balcony, which threw a broad shadow on the water. Here she sat and watched the young prince, who thought himself alone in the bright moonlight. She often saw him in the evenings, sailing in a beautiful boat on which music sounded and flags waved. She peeped out from among the green rushes, and if the wind caught her long silvery white veil, those who saw it believed to be a swan spreading out its wings. Many a night, too, when the fishermen set their nets by the light of their torches, She heard them relate many good things about the young prince, and this made her glad that she had saved his life when he was tossed about half dead on the waves. But he knew nothing of all this, and could not even dream of her. She grew more and more to like human beings, and wished more and more to be able to wander about with those whose world seemed to be so much larger than her own. There was so much that she wished to know, but her sisters were unable to answer all her questions. She went to her old grandmother, who knew all about the lands above the sea. "If human beings are not drowned," asked the little mermaid, "can they live forever? Do they never die as we do here in the sea?" "Yes," replied the old lady, "they must also die, and their term of life is even shorter than ours. We sometimes live for 300 years, but when we cease to exist here, we become only foam on the surface of the water, and have not even a grave among those we love. We have not immortal souls. We shall never live again. And like the green seaweed once it has been cut off, we can never flourish more. Human beings, on the contrary, have souls that live forever, even even after the body has been turned into dust. They rise up through the clear, pure air beyond the glittering stars." "Why have not we immortal souls?" asked the little mermaid mournfully. "I would gladly give all the hundreds of years I have to live to be a human being for only one day, and to have the hope of knowing the happiness of that glorious world above the stars. Is there anything I can do to win an immortal soul?" "No," said the old woman, "unless a man should love you so much that you are more to him than his father or his mother, and if all his thoughts and all his love were fixed upon you, and the priest placed his right hand in yours, and he promised to be true to you here and hereafter, then his soul would glide into your body, and you would obtain a share in the future of happiness of mankind. He would give to you a soul and retain his own as well, but this can never happen. Your fish's tail, which among us is considered so beautiful, on earth is thought to be quite ugly. They do not know any better, and they think it necessary in order to be handsome, so to have 2 stout props, which they call legs." Then the little mermaid sighed and looked sorrowfully at her fish's tail. This artwork is truly amazing. Sorry about the glare, y'all. "Let us be happy," said the old lady, "and dart and spring about during the 300 years that we have to live, which is really quite long enough. After that, we can rest ourselves all the better. But this evening, we are going to have a court ball." The court ball was one of those splendid sights that we can never see on earth. The walls and the ceilings of the large ballroom were of thick but transparent crystal. Many hundreds of colossal shells stood in rows on each side, lighting up the whole saloon. Innumerable fish, great and small, swam past the crystal walls, On some of them, the scales glowed with purple brilliance, and on others like silver and gold. Through the halls flowed a broad stream, and in it danced the mermen and the mermaids to the music of their own sweet singing. But the little mermaid sang more sweetly than all. The whole court applauded her with hands and tails, and for a moment her heart felt quite gay, for she knew she had the sweetest voice either on earth or in sea. But soon she thought again of the world above her. She could not forget the charming prince, nor her sorrow that she had not an immortal soul like his. She crept away silently out of her father's palace and sat in her own little garden, sorrowful and alone. Then she heard the bugle sounding through the water and thought, "He is certainly sailing above, he in whom my wishes center, and in whose hands I should like to place the happiness of my life. I will venture all for him and to win an immortal soul. While my sisters are dancing in my father's palace, I will go to the sea witch, of whom I have always been so much afraid. She can give me counsel and help." Then the little mermaid went out from her garden and took the road to the foaming whirlpools, behind which the sorceress lived. Neither flowers nor grass grew there. Nothing but bare, gray, sandy ground stretched out to the whirlpool, where the water seized everything that came within its reach and cast it into the fathomless deep. Beyond this was the witch's house, which stood in the center of a strange forest, where all the trees and flowers were polypi, half animals and half plants. They looked like serpents with 100 heads growing out of the ground. The branches were long, slimy arms with fingers like flexible worms. All that could be reached they seized upon and held fast, so that it never escaped from their clutches. The little mermaid was so alarmed at what she saw that she stood still, and her heart beat with fear. She came very near turning back, but she thought of the prince and of the human soul for which she longed, and her courage returned. She fastened her long flowing hair around her head so that the polypi would not lay hold of it, and then darted forward as a fish shoots. Through the water between the supple arms and fingers of the ugly polypi, which were stretched out on each side of her. Ew. She now came to a space of marshy ground in the wood, where large, fat water snakes were rolling in the mire and showing their ugly, dark-colored bodies. In the midst of this spot stood a house built of bones of shipwrecked humans. There sat the sea witch, feeding a toad. She called the ugly water snakes her little chickens and allowed them to crawl all over her. "I know what you want," said the sea witch. "It is very stupid of you, but you shall have your way, though it will bring you sorrow, my pretty princess. You want to get rid of your fish's tail and have 2 supports instead, like human beings on earth, so that the young prince may fall in love with you, and you may have an immortal soul." And then the witch laughed so loud and disgustingly that the toad and the snakes fell to the ground and lay there wriggling. "You are just in time," said the witch, "for after sunrise tomorrow I should not be able to help you till the end of another year. I will prepare a potion for you. You must swim to land with it tomorrow before sunrise. Seat yourself there and drink it. Your tail will then disappear and shrink up into what men call legs. You will feel great pain, as if a sword was passing through you. But all who see you will say that you are the prettiest little human being they have ever saw. You will still have the same floating gracefulness of movement, and no dancer will ever tread so lightly. Every step you take, however, will be as if you were treading upon sharp knives. If you will bear this, I will help you. Yes, I will, said the little princess in a trembling voice as she thought of the prince and the immortal soul. But think again, said the witch. For once your shape has become like a human being, you can no more be a mermaid. You will never return through the water to your sisters or to your father's palace again. And if you do not win the love of the prince, then you will never have an immortal soul. The first morning after he marries another, your heart will break, and you will become foam on the crest of the waves. Pretty. I will do it, said the little mermaid, and she became pale as death. But I must be paid also, said the witch. And it is not a trifle that I ask. You have the sweetest voice of any who dwell here in the depths of the sea, and you believe that you will be able to charm the prince with it. But this voice, you must give it to me. I will have the best thing you possess as the price of my costly potion, which must be mixed with my own blood, so that it may be as sharp as a two-edged sword. But if you take away my voice, said the little mermaid, what is left for me? Your beautiful form, your graceful walk, and your expressive eyes. Surely with these things you can enchain a man's heart. Well, have you lost your courage? It shall be, said the little mermaid. Then the witch placed her cauldron on the fire to prepare the magic potion. Every moment the witch threw a new ingredient into the vessel, and when it began to boil, the sound was like the weeping of a crocodile. When at last the magic draught was ready, it looked like the clearest water. There it is for you, said the witch. Then she took the mermaid's tongue so that she would never again speak or sing. If the polypi sees you as you return through the wood, said the witch, throw over them a few drops of the potion, and their fingers will be torn into 1,000 pieces. But the little mermaid had no occasion to do this, for the polypi sprung back in terror when they caught sight of the glittering potion, which shone in her hand like a twinkling star. She passed quickly through the wood and in the marsh and between the rushing whirlpools. She saw that in her father's palace, the torches in the ballroom were extinguished, and all within were asleep. But she did not venture to go into them, for now that she could not speak and was going to leave them forever, she felt as if her heart would break. She stole into the garden and took a flower from the flower bed of each of her sisters, kissed her hand toward the palace 1,000 times, and then rose up through the dark blue waters. The sun had not risen when she came in sight of the prince's palace and approached the beautiful marble steps, but the moon shone clear and bright. Then the little mermaid drank the magic draught, and it seemed as if a two-edged sword went through her delicate body. She fell into a swoon and lay like one dead. When the sun rose and shone over the sea, she recovered and felt a sharp pain, but before her stood the handsome young prince. He fixed his coal-black eyes upon her so earnestly that she cast down her own, and then became aware that her fish's tail was gone, and that she had a pretty pair of white legs and tiny feet, as any little maiden could have. But she had no clothes, so she wrapped herself in her long, thick hair. The prince asked her who she was and whence she came. She looked at him mildly and sorrowfully with her deep blue eyes, but could not speak. He took her by the hand and led her to the palace. Every step she took was as the witch had said it would be. She felt as if she were treading upon the points of needles or sharp knives. She bore it willingly, however, and moved at the prince's side as lightly as a bubble, so that he and all who saw her wondered at her graceful, swaying movements. She was very soon arrayed in costly robes of silk and muslin, and was the most beautiful creature in the palace. But she could neither speak or sing. Beautiful women dressed in silk and gold stepped forward and sang before the prince and his royal parents. One sang better than all the others, and the prince clapped his hands and smiled at her. This was a great sorrow to the little mermaid, for she knew how much more sweetly she herself once could sing, and she thought, "Oh, if only he could know that I have given away my voice forever to be with him." The women next performed some pretty fairy-like dances to the sound of beautiful music. Then the little mermaid raised her lovely white arms, stood on the tips of her toes, glided over the floor, and danced as no one had yet been able to dance. At each moment, her beauty was more revealed, and her expressive eyes appealed more directly to the heart than the songs of the women. Everyone was enchanted, especially the prince. The prince said she should remain with him always, and she was given permission to sleep at his door on a velvet cushion. He had men's clothes made for her, that she might accompany him on horseback. They rode together through the sweet-scented woods, where the green boughs touched their shoulders, and the little birds sang among the fresh leaves. She climbed with him to the tops of high mountains, and although her tender feet bled, she only smiled and followed him till they could see the clouds beneath them, like a flock of birds flying in the distant lands. At the prince's palace, when all the household were asleep, she would go and sit on the broad marble steps, for it eased her burning feet to bathe them in the cold seawater. It was then that she thought of those below in the deep. Once during the night, her sisters came up arm in arm, singing sorrowfully as they floated on the water. She beckoned to them, and they recognized her and told her how she had saddened them. After that, they came to the same place every night. Once she saw in the distance her old grandmother, who had not been to the surface of the sea for many years, and the old sea king, her father, with his crown on his head. They stretched out their hands towards her, but did not venture so near the land as her sisters had. As the days passed, she loved the prince more dearly, and he loved her as one would love a little child. Yet the thought never came to make him her. But the thought never came to him to make her his wife. Unless he married her, she could not receive an immortal soul. On the morning after his marriage with another, she would dissolve into the foam of the sea. Do you not love me, the best of them all? The eyes of the little mermaid seemed to say. When he took her in his arms and kissed her fair forehead. Yes, you are dear to me, said the prince, for you have the best heart, and you are the most devoted to me. You are like a young maiden whom I once saw, but whom I shall never meet again. I was in a ship that was wrecked, and the waves cast me ashore near a holy temple where several young maidens lived. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her but twice, and she is the only one in the world whom I could love. But you are like her, and you have almost driven her image from my mind. She belongs to the holy temple, and good fortune has sent you to me in her stead. We will never part. Alas, he knows not it was I who saved his life, thought the little mermaid. I carried him over the sea to the wood where the temple stands. I sat beneath the foam and watched till the human beings came to help him. I saw the pretty maiden that he loves better than he loves me. The mermaid sighed deeply, but she could not weep. He says the maiden belongs to the holy temple. Therefore, they will meet no more. I am by his side, and I see him every day. I will take care of him and love him and give up my life for his sake. Very soon it was said that the prince was to marry, and that the beautiful daughter of a neighboring king would be his wife. The little mermaid smiled and shook her head. She knew the prince's thoughts better than any of the others. I must travel, he said to her. I must see this beautiful princess. My parents desire it, but they will not oblige me to bring her home as my bride. I cannot love her because she is not like the beautiful maiden in the temple, whom you resemble. If I were forced to choose a bride, I would choose you, my mute foundling, with those expressive eyes. Then he kissed her rosy mouth, played with her long, wavy hair, and laid his head on her heart while she dreamed of human happiness and an immortal soul. Are you not afraid of the sea, my child? Are you? He said, as they stood on the deck of the noble ship that was to carry them to the country of the neighboring king. Then he told her of storm and of calm. And of strange fishes in the deep, and of what the divers had seen there. She smiled at his descriptions, for she knew better than anyone what wonders were at the bottom of the sea. In the moonlit night, when all on board were asleep except the man at helm, she sat on deck, gazing down through the clear water. She almost thought she could distinguish her father's castle. Then her sisters came up on the waves and gazed at her mournfully, wringing their white hands. She beckoned to them and smiled and wanted to tell them how happy and well off she was. But the cabin boy approached, and when her sisters dived down, he thought what he saw was only the foam of the sea. The next morning the ship sailed into the harbor of a beautiful town belonging to the king, whom the prince was going to visit. The church bells were ringing, and from the high towers sounded a flourish of trumpets. Soldiers with flying colors and glittering bayonets lined the roads through which they had passed. Every day was a festival, balls and entertainments following one another. But the princess had not yet appeared. People said that she had been brought up and educated in a religious house, where she was learning every royal virtue. At last she came. The little mermaid was obliged to admit that she had never seen a more perfect vision of beauty. Her skin was delicately fair, and beneath her long, dark eyelashes, her laughing blue eyes shone with truth and purity. "It was you," said the prince, "who saved my life when I lay as if dead on the beach." He folded his blushing bride in his arms. "Oh, I am too happy," he said to the little mermaid. "My fondest hopes are now fulfilled. You will rejoice at my happiness, for your devotion to me is great and sincere." The little mermaid kissed his hand and felt as if her heart were already broken. His wedding morning would bring death to her, and she would change into the foam of the sea. All the church bells rang, and the heralds rode through the town proclaiming the betrothal. Perfumed oil was burned in costly silver lamps on every altar. The priest waved the incense burners while the bride and the bridegroom joined their hands and received the blessing of the bishop. The little mermaid, dressed in silk and gold, held up the bride's train, but her ears heard nothing of the festive music, and her eyes saw not the holy ceremony. She thought of the night of death that was coming to her, and of all she had lost in this world. On the same evening, the bride and bridegroom went on board the ship. Cannons were roaring, flags waving, and in the center of the ship a costly tent of purple and gold had been erected. It contained elegant sleeping couches for the bridal pair during the night. The ship, under a favorable wind, with swelling sails, glided away smoothly and lightly over the calm sea. When it grew dark, a number of colored lamps were lit, and the sailors danced merrily on deck. The little mermaid could not help thinking of her first rising out of sea, when she had seen similar joyful festivities. So she too joined in the dance, and all present cheered her wonderingly. She had never danced so gracefully before. Her tender feet felt as if cut with sharp knives, but she cared not for the pain. A sharper pang had pierced her heart. She knew this was the last evening she should ever see the prince for whom she had forsaken her family and her home. She had given up her beautiful voice and suffered unheard of pain daily for him, while he knew nothing of it. This was the last evening that she would breathe the same air with him or gaze on the starry sky and the deep sea. An eternal night without a thought or a dream awaited her. She had no soul, and now she could never win one. All was joy and gaiety on the ship until long after midnight. She smiled and danced with the rest, while the thought of death was in her heart. The prince kissed his beautiful bride, and she played with his raven hair till they went arm in arm to rest in the sumptuous tent. Then all became still on board the ship, and only the pilot, who stood at the helm, was awake. The little mermaid leaned her white arms on the edge of the vessel and looked towards the east for the first blush of morning, for that first ray of the dawn. That was to be her death. She saw her sisters rising out of the flood. They were as pale as she, but their beautiful hair no longer waved in the wind. it had been cut off. "We have given our hair to the witch," they said, "to obtain help for you, so that you will not die tonight. She has given us a knife. See, it is very sharp. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the heart of the prince. When the warm blood falls upon your feet, they will grow together again into a fish's tail. You will once more be a mermaid and can return to us to live out your 300 years before you are changed into sea foam. Haste then. Either he or you must die before sunrise. Kill the prince and come back. In a few minutes, the sun... hasten. Do you not see the first red streaks in the sky? In a few minutes, the sun will rise." Then they sighed deeply and mournfully and sank beneath the waves. The little mermaid drew back the crimson curtain of the tent and beheld the fair bride, whose head was resting on the prince's chest. She bent down and kissed his noble brow, then looked at the sky on which the rosy dawn grew brighter and brighter. She glanced at the sharp knife and again fixed her eyes on the prince, who whispered the name of his bride in his dreams. She alone was in his thoughts, and the knife trembled in the hand of the little mermaid. But she flung it far from her into the waves, and the water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted. The water turned red where it fell, and the drops that spurted up looked like blood. She cast one more lingering glance at the prince, then threw herself from the ship into the sea, and felt her body dissolving into foam. The sun rose above the waves. His warm rays fell on the cold foam of the little mermaid, who did not feel as if she were dying. She saw the bright sun, the hundreds of transparent, beautiful creatures floating around her, and she could see through them the white sails of the ships and the red clouds in the sky. Their speech was melodious, but could not be heard by mortal ears, just as their bodies could not be seen by mortal eyes. The little mermaid perceived that she had a body like theirs, and that she continued to rise higher and higher out of the foam. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice sounded ethereal, like the voices of those who were with her. No earthly music could imitate it. "Among the daughters of the air," answered one of them. "A mermaid has not an immortal soul, nor can she obtain one unless she wins the love of a human being. On the will of another hangs her eternal destiny. But the daughters of the air, although they do not possess an immortal soul, can procure one for themselves by their good deeds. After we have striven for 300 years to do all the good in our power, we receive an immortal soul and take part in the happiness of mankind. You poor little mermaid, have tried with your whole heart to do as we are doing. You have suffered. You have suffered and endured and raised yourself to the spirit world by your good deeds. And now you may obtain an immortal soul." The little mermaid lifted her glorified eyes toward the sun, and for the first time felt them filling with tears. On the ship where she had left the prince, there was life and noise, and she saw him and his beautiful bride searching for her. Sorrowfully they gazed at the pearly foam, as if they knew she had thrown herself into the waves. Unseen, she kissed the forehead of the bride and fanned the prince, and then mounted with the other children of the air to a rosy cloud that floated above. The end. I think that some of this was a little bit more different than the other one that I read for some reason. I feel like some of it was, some of the wording was different in some way. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. So, I'll talk about my opinion of the book is that this would actually be a very good horror-ish style movie. I do feel like there was a little bit of religious undertones to it. As far as the pictures goes, and I mean, like, this is some beautiful, beautiful artwork. This is really amazing, and I mean, it's just so delicate, but yet so lively at the same time. I like that there was a female figure in her life, which happened, not just her sisters, but her grandmother as well. Grandmother stepped up and took care of her and her sisters. I also like the fact that all of them got to go up to the surface. So it wasn't just this little mermaid. It was her and all of her siblings as well. I like how, you know, she had a choice. We, you know, as a human being, we always have choices to make. Are they going to be good choices? No, not always, right? Like, I feel like that's the gift of being able to be in this human form is if the choice you made was incorrect, you have another choice to change it. You can't go back, but you can make a choice to redirect and go another direction that would be more suited for yourself. Yeah, this book is just, I personally like the story. I might end up making another video talking about my little collection of mermaid stuff that I have. I am an 89 baby, so, you know, the animated first one came out in 89. And when I was old enough to pay attention and notice and see things, I was an Ariel girl through and through. To this day, I still am. You know, there's a lot of differences between the book and the animated version. I do like that they still kept true to the witch's intentions. By the way, how creepy were those polyps? Like with the finger? Like, could you imagine how much more scarier that would have been in the original Little Mermaid? Like, just how scary. I also like that the witch was a little bit like, you know, safety first. Go up to the top, put your butt on land, drink it, you'll be fine. Instead of like in the, whatever. I also like the fact that to me, it's a good little notion of understanding that people are redeemable. You may think that you're not capable of achieving something or getting something, but in reality, you are. We all go through struggles. We all go through moments where we feel like we're just not good enough. We go through moments where we feel like we don't deserve certain things. And I think that it's important to remember that doing good is great, but making a mistake is okay. And don't go like, if a choice between murder somebody or go away, like, come on now. Let's just go away from the situation. She didn't let this jealousy, this enviousness, she didn't let any of that dictate the fact that she simply could not cause harm. And she loved him so much that she was willing to risk her own life in return. You know, there's a lot of takeaways from this book. I think that there's a lot of comparisons that I really want to do. But anyways, what did you guys think about it? Also, I'm sorry that I'm in completely different clothing than what I was in the first part of this video. It was so, this book, I mean, look, it doesn't look like it's that much. But I mean, y'all saw there's a lot of words on these pages. And so the short story was not as short as I was hoping to get it done in. But anyways, if you watched it this far, I really do appreciate it. Thank you for the comments. Thank you for the interactions. I really enjoy interacting with you guys. So leave me a comment below if you guys are Little Mermaid fans. Are you Disney fans? And you know, I don't mean Disney the company fans. That's not what I mean. I mean the products that they put out. Are you a fan of their products? Not just products, but you know what I mean, like the movies and whatever. That's still products, right? Anyway, before I go, I want you guys to remember, when you breathe kindness, and when you love wholeheartedly.